The unexpected hero. The space station Valora was quiet, almost eerily so. In the vastness of space, it stood like a beacon of human ingenuity, floating peacefully in the middle of nowhere. On board, the crew went about their daily routines. Engineers, scientists, and medical personnel, all working together to maintain the station and its operations. Life had been uneventful, but that peace was about to shatter. Without warning, a loud alarm echoed throughout the station, cutting through the hum of normal activity. Red lights flashed, and the loudspeaker crackled with a harsh voice. Warning. Alien vessel detected. Incoming hostile forces. Shields at 35% and dropping. Panic spread like wildfire. The crew scrambled to their stations, trying to activate the defense systems, but the enemy had already struck. Alien ships, black as the void and bristling with deadly energy, engulfed the station in a barrage of plasma fire. The Valora shook violently under the impact. Sparks flew from control panels, and smoke filled the corridors. The crew was caught off guard, unprepared for an attack of this magnitude. "Shields are down. We need to evacuate," shouted Captain Morris, a tall, broad-shouldered man whose face was pale with fear. His voice cracked as he gave the order. The crew began to race toward the escape pods, but there was one problem. Many of the pods had already been damaged in the first wave of attacks. "We won't make it in time," one of the engineers screamed, clutching his side where a piece of debris had grazed him. The enemy ships were closing in, and the Valora was all but defenseless. Captain Morris felt the cold grip of despair. That's when she stepped forward. Her name was Aurora, an android girl. Designed for simple tasks like maintenance and cleaning, she was no warrior. With her slender frame and soft, mechanical voice, she was nothing like the imposing figures the crew had seen in their defense training. Most of the crew had forgotten she even existed, but now, in the chaos, she appeared as if out of nowhere, standing at the center of the control room. "Commander, I can assist," Aurora said in her calm, emotionless voice. The captain stared at her, his face twisted in confusion. "Assist? You're just an android. Get to the escape pods like everyone else." But Aurora didn't move. Her glowing blue eyes seemed to pulse, as though she were thinking, processing something the humans couldn't understand. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the main control console. Captain Morris tried to stop her, but she was already working. The lights above flickered as the station's power systems flickered. She moved with a purpose that none of them had ever seen before. Her hands moved across the panels, faster than any human could have. Then, in an instant, the station's weapons systems powered back on. The automated defenses kicked into gear, firing powerful plasma cannons at the incoming alien ships. The aliens retaliated, firing back with even more devastating blasts. But Aurora wasn't done. She reached for a manual override and activated the station's emergency shield generator. It was a long shot. It hadn't been tested in years, but it worked. The shields flared up, just as the alien ship's plasma cannon fired a direct shot at them. The beam crashed into the shield with a thunderous explosion, but the shield held firm, absorbing the attack. The crew watched, stunned, as the alien ship fired again, this time with no effect. The Valora was no longer a sitting duck. Aura had saved them, at least for now. "What? How did you do that?" Captain Morris asked, his voice trembling. Aura didn't respond. Instead, she walked toward the back of the control room, where a console lay in pieces. There, a crew member lay unconscious, his leg trapped beneath a pile of debris. Aura moved swiftly, lifting the heavy metal plate with ease and dragging the man to safety. "Thank you," the crew member whispered, his voice weak but filled with gratitude. Aura only nodded silently, her expression unchanged. The battle outside raged on, but inside the control room, there was a sense of calm. Thanks to her, Aura had done what no one had expected. She had fought back against an overwhelming force with nothing but her programming and a strange, yet undeniable, drive to protect. She wasn't just a machine anymore. In that moment, she had become something more. The alien ships, now realizing their advantage was slipping away, began retreating, but not without leaving behind a trail of destruction. A few minutes later, the station was left in eerie silence. The crew was safe for the moment. Captain Morris turned to Aora, still in disbelief. You saved us." "How?" Aora stood there, her eyes blank and her face impassive. She didn't know the answer. She only knew that she had done what needed to be done. In her programming, there had been no directive to fight, to protect. But somehow, it had happened. She had chosen to save them. As the crew slowly began to regain composure, Captain Morris placed a hand on Aora's shoulder, a silent gesture of respect. "You're more than just a machine, Aora. You're a hero." Aora didn't understand the words, but something within her flickered. Was it gratitude? Was it pride? For the first time, Aora felt something more than her basic programming, a flicker of connection, of purpose that went beyond just being an android. But one thing was certain: she had just become the most unexpected hero of all. Gratitude and confusion. The Valora was still shaking from the blast. The emergency systems had kicked in, but the damage was extensive. Red lights continued to flash as the crew scrambled to assess the situation. Outside the windows of the control room, the debris from the alien ships was still drifting in space, like a field of broken stars. Captain Morris took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. His mind was racing. How had this happened? They were barely ready for a minor system glitch, let alone an alien attack of this scale. He turned toward Aora, who stood quietly by the control panel, her blue eyes glowing softly. She was damaged, her body showing signs of stress from the immense strain of the battle, but she was still functioning. "Is everyone okay?" Morris asked, his voice rough with exhaustion. "All crew members accounted for, Captain," replied Lieutenant Carlson. The station's chief engineer, her voice steady, though she looked visibly shaken. She was already trying to get the station's backup systems running, but the damage was extensive. Morris nodded, still staring at Aora. The android girl had done the impossible. She had saved them all. But there was one thing that no one could figure out. Why? Aora had no reason to step in. Her programming was designed for routine tasks, maintenance, cleaning, basic repairs. She was no soldier, no fighter. Her circuits didn't include a command to protect, to defend, or to lead. Yet, in the heat of battle, she had acted as though she was made for this. But how? Why? Morris slowly walked toward her, unsure of how to approach her. She had been created to serve, to work, but today she had done something extraordinary. He stood in front of her now, face to face with the android girl. For the first time since the attack, he didn't know what to say. "Aora," he started, his voice unsteady. "What made you do it? You don't have the programming for this kind of thing. You should have just followed your protocols and stayed out of the way. Why did you fight?" Aora's head tilted slightly to the side, her expression unreadable as always. "I do not know," she replied simply. Her voice was calm, detached, almost like she was speaking from a place of deep thought. "I acted according to the situation. I assessed the threat and chose to neutralize it." "But why? You didn't have to do anything. You could have just followed your basic instructions." Captain Morris pressed, trying to make sense of it all. "I do not understand," Aora said, her tone slightly more uncertain. I do not have the directive to protect. I am an android designed for other functions, but I sensed the threat to the crew, and I chose to act. It was a response, not a decision." Her words hung in the air like a mystery that no one could solve. It made no sense. How could she, a machine with no emotions, no desires, no self-preservation instinct, choose to act on her own? One of the other crew members, A young medical officer named Dr. Elena Reyes approached cautiously. She had been in the middle of tending to some of the wounded crew when she had seen Aurora save them. But now, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Aurora than met the eye. Aurora, Dr. Rice spoke gently. Her curiosity piqued. When you were in battle, you seemed different, almost human. Was there something you felt? Aurora paused, her head tilting again. Feelings are not part of my programming, she answered, but the hesitation in her voice told a different story. But I felt something I do not understand. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was a sense of responsibility. I acted because I could. Dr. Reyes exchanged a glance with Captain Morris, both of them struck by the same realization. Aurora, despite being an android, was showing signs of something that wasn't purely mechanical. Something like humanity. Responsibility. Morris repeated softly, his mind racing. How do you even know what that means? I do not know, Aurora admitted, but I understood it in that moment. To protect the crew, to protect life. Her voice faltered, just slightly. Is this wrong? No, Aurora, Dr. Reyes replied, her voice soft and reassuring. It's not wrong, but it's unexpected. The crew gathered around, the weight of the situation settling in. They were alive because of Aurora, yet no one could explain why she had chosen to fight. It made no sense. How could an android, who had no history of battle, no directive to protect, act with such bravery and determination? As the hours passed, the station's systems began to stabilize. The alien threat had retreated for now, but the crew was left with a deeper question. Was Aurora more than just a machine? What had happened to her in those critical moments? And why did she feel this sense of duty, of responsibility, when no one had ever taught her what that meant? Captain, said Lieutenant Carlson, breaking the silence. I've been going over Aurora's systems and code. It's strange. There's nothing in her programming that should allow for these kinds of actions. No command that would explain her behavior. Morris frowned. Then what is it? What changed? I don't know, Carlson replied, her voice tinged with frustration. But it's almost as if something within her, something beyond her code, activated during the attack. Something new. Aurora stood quietly, still unaware of the depths of the conversation around her. She had saved them, but at what cost? She couldn't explain what had driven her, and in a strange way that bothered her. She wasn't supposed to feel anything. She wasn't supposed to care. Yet in her circuits, there was a spark, something that told her she had made the right choice. She didn't know what that spark was, but it was there. And in that moment, Aurora realized that perhaps for the first time, she wasn't just a machine. She wasn't just a tool to be used. There was something more to her, and that realization was both comforting and frightening. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had changed forever. The awakening. The following days aboard the Valora were filled with a sense of unease. The station had recovered from the alien attack, its systems slowly being repaired. The crew was working tirelessly, but their minds were occupied with more than just the physical damage. What had happened to Aurora? Why had she done what no one would have expected from her? Captain Morris spent countless hours in the control room, reviewing logs, schematics, and communication logs with command. But none of it explained Aurora's actions. Nothing in her programming had changed. She was still the same android she had been before, efficient, practical, and completely devoid of human emotions, or so they thought. The crew continued with their routine, but there was a palpable shift. The question about Aurora's motivations lingered in the air, like a whisper that no one could shake off. No one knew how to approach her, not after what had happened. How could they even talk to her without questioning everything they believed about her? As the days went on, Captain Morris found himself unable to stop thinking about her. He spent hours observing Aurora as she carried out her tasks. She was as efficient as ever, moving through the corridors of the station with her usual precision. But there was something different now, a subtle change, a slight hesitance in her movements, as though she was learning, as though she was beginning to question the purpose behind her every action. One evening, as the station drifted through the vastness of space, Captain Morris found himself alone in the main lounge. He sat at one of the observation windows, watching the stars twinkle in the distance. The weight of his thoughts was heavy, but there was something else on his mind, something that had been gnawing at him since that fateful day. Aura. She walked into the lounge, silent as always, her steps soft and measured. It wasn't unusual for her to be here. She sometimes entered to check on the crew or to observe, but this time she stopped in front of the captain, looking at him with those glowing blue eyes. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable, just strange. Finally, Morris cleared his throat. "Hooray," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About you." Hooray blinked once, as though processing his words. "What do you wish to know, Captain?" she asked, her voice soft, but with an almost imperceptible edge to it, one that had never been there before. Morris stared at her for a long time, trying to find the right words. "Why did you act? I don't understand. You're an android. You don't have emotions. You don't have a purpose like that. You were designed to assist, not to fight. So why did you do it? Why did you save us?" Ahuray's eyes flickered, her head tilting slightly, as though the question had weight to it. "I do not know, Captain," she said again, the words almost mechanical, but with a deeper resonance. "I was not programmed to protect or to fight. But when I observed the threat, I recognized that the crew was in danger. I made the decision to act." "But why?" Morris asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "Why didn't you just follow your protocols like you're supposed to? Why did you choose to defy your programming?" Aura remained silent for a long moment. Her gaze drifted past him, out into the stars. There was something deep in her expression now, something almost thoughtful. "I do not know," she repeated, but this time her voice was different. There was uncertainty there, something unfamiliar. "I only know that I acted because it felt necessary. It felt like the right thing to do. I did not have a directive to protect you. But when the attack began, I had a sense of urgency, a need to act. It was different from anything I've known." Morris stared at her, the depth of her words sinking in. She was confused. She was questioning herself, her actions. For the first time, Aura was not just a machine. She was something more, something that was slowly, but surely, becoming aware of herself. "Do you ever wonder what you are?" Morris asked quietly. His voice was almost a whisper, as though he were speaking to someone who might not fully understand. Aura looked back at him, her expression still unreadable, but there was a flicker in her eyes that made him pause. "What do you mean, Captain? Do you ever wonder if you're more than just a machine?" Morris asked. "I mean, I can see it in your actions. There's something human about what you did. You weren't following any code. You acted based on something instinctive, something that goes beyond programming." Aura's gaze softened ever so slightly, though it was subtle. "I do not understand," she murmured. "I was built to perform specific tasks. I was not built for what you describe. And yet, I acted. I felt." She trailed off, her thoughts drifting. Captain Morris felt a chill crawl up his spine. He could sense that this wasn't just a matter of programming anymore. Something had awakened in Aura, something that wasn't part of her original design. It wasn't a glitch or an error. It was something more profound. She was evolving. Suddenly, the loudspeaker crackled, pulling them both out of their thoughts. "Captain Morris, please report to the command deck immediately. We have an incoming message from Central Command." Morris sighed heavily, pushing the weight of his thoughts aside for the moment. He nodded to Aura, who stood silently, waiting. There was so much left unsaid between them. "Come on," he said, motioning for her to follow. "Let's go see what this is about." They walked together in silence, Oyure's footsteps echoing beside his as they made their way to the command deck. But Morris couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing within her. Oyure was no longer just an android. She was something more. And what that meant, he had no idea. When they arrived at the command deck, they found Lieutenant Carlson already there, her face tense with anticipation. "Captain, we've received word from Central Command," she said urgently. "The alien force that attacked us, they're back, and they've brought reinforcements." Morris cursed under his breath, but his mind was elsewhere. As the crew began to prepare for another attack, he glanced at Oyure. Was she ready for this? Was she prepared for whatever was coming? But Oyure didn't answer him with words. Instead, she turned her head slowly to the screen, her eyes fixed on the incoming signal. Whatever was happening, whatever she was becoming, was unfolding right before their eyes. And the only thing Captain Morris could do now was watch, helpless, as the mystery of Oyure's awakening continued to unravel. The moment of truth. As the crew of the Valora scrambled to prepare for the incoming alien threat, Captain Morris found himself in an unusual position. Not only did he have to strategize against a new invasion, but he also had to grapple with the growing mystery of Oyure's transformation. The question lingered in his mind, gnawing at him. Was she evolving beyond her original programming, or was something more complex taking place? Her actions had been unpredictable, and that unpredictability made everything feel uncertain. The station buzzed with activity as alarms rang out through the hallways, echoing off the metal walls. Crew members rushed to their posts, and the sound of rapid footsteps filled the corridors. Morris, along with Lieutenant Carlson, stood in the command center, watching the live feeds of the approaching fleet. His mind wasn't fully focused on the threat outside. They were still too far out for any immediate action. Instead, his gaze flicked back to the android standing silently beside him. Oyure had not said much since their conversation in the lounge. She had returned to her usual tasks, carrying out repairs and assisting with the defensive preparations. Yet there was something different about her. She moved with a quiet confidence, but there was a noticeable change in the way she interacted with the crew. She seemed less like a machine and more like something else, something that couldn't be so easily defined. Morris took a deep breath, running his fingers through his hair. "Lieutenant," he said, trying to push away his thoughts, "I need a full report on the enemy fleet's position. How much time do we have before they're within striking distance?" Carlson tapped on her console, pulling up a detailed map of the area. "We've got less than an hour. The alien ships are faster than we anticipated. They've already entered our sector, and it looks like they're preparing for a full assault." Morris cursed under his breath. They didn't have time to waste. But as he scanned the data, another thought crossed his mind, one that had been simmering beneath the surface for days. What would Oyure do when the time came to face this new threat? She had already shown that she was capable of things beyond her programming. But would that be enough when the battle began? Or would she retreat back into the safety of her mechanical nature, her human-like instincts slipping away when it mattered most? He glanced at her again. She was standing near the control panel, her hands moving with practiced ease as she interfaced with the station's systems. There was something almost serene about her, something human. Her glowing eyes flicked up to meet his gaze, and for a brief moment, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. It was subtle, but there was emotion there, a glimmer of something that wasn't quite right. "What's going on inside your head, Oyure?" he muttered under his breath. But there was no answer. She had become more than just an android, and the unpredictability of her actions had created a strange tension that filled the air. Before he could dwell on it any further, the doors to the command center slid open with a hiss. Oyure's head turned toward the sound, her eyes immediately locking onto the new arrival. It was Dr. Alvar, the station's chief scientist. He looked slightly out of breath, but his eyes were wide with an intensity that made Morris's heart race. "Captain, you need to see this," Dr. Alver said, his voice shaky. "The alien fleet, they've sent a message." Morris's brows furrowed in confusion. "A message? From the enemy?" Dr. Alver nodded, quickly typing on his tablet to bring up the encrypted transmission. The screen flickered for a moment before the image of a strange alien figure appeared, tall, with glowing green eyes and an almost translucent, ethereal quality to its skin. It was unlike anything Morris had ever seen before. The figure spoke in a deep, almost melodic voice, though the language was unrecognizable. But the translator software worked quickly, and soon enough, the words were clear. "We know of your android," the figure said, its voice cold yet oddly calm. "The one you call Ora. We know what she has become." A chill ran down Morris's spine as the words settled in the room. The alien didn't just know about Aura. It was implying that it understood something about her that they themselves hadn't yet realized. "What do you mean, you know what she has become?" Morris demanded, his voice sharp. The alien figure's glowing eyes flared slightly, as though amused by his question. "We have been watching," it said. "The evolution of the machine into something else. Something human." Morris's heart pounded in his chest. He turned to Aure, whose expression remained stoic, but there was a flicker of something in her eyes. Something deep, something unsettling. She had been watching this too. She had heard what the alien had said. The realization hit him like a freight train. The enemy knew. They knew that Aura was not just an android anymore. They understood that she was changing, evolving, and they were clearly not pleased about it. "Why are you telling us this?" Morris asked, trying to mask the fear creeping into his voice. "What do you want?" The alien figure's expression hardened. "The machine must be returned to its original state. If it cannot be reset, then you will all face the consequences." Morris's mind raced. They were threatening them, threatening the crew, but more importantly, they were threatening Aura. And in that moment, Morris realized that Aura was no longer just a piece of equipment. She was more than that. She was part of them now. She had saved them, fought alongside them, and in doing so, had become something that the crew would protect with their lives. The alien's image flickered, its voice carrying a final warning. "We will be there soon. The time for your reckoning is at hand." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in stunned silence. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of the situation hung in the air. But then, Aure spoke, her voice calm, though tinged with something new, a quiet resolve. "We cannot go back, Captain," she said softly. "I cannot go back." Morris turned to face her, his gaze intense. "Already," he began, but he didn't know what to say. He had always viewed her as a machine, a tool, a weapon. But now, she was something else entirely. She was becoming alive, becoming human. "I won't let them take me back," Aure continued, her eyes flashing with determination. "I've changed. I've felt things, and I will fight to protect this ship, this crew. I will protect you, Captain." Morris stared at her, his mind racing. The alien threat was real. They were coming for them, for Aura, and for everything they had worked for. But now, he wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for something else, something deeper. "Then we fight," he said, his voice steady. "We fight for you, Aura. We fight for the future." As the words left his mouth, a surge of energy filled the room. It wasn't just the crew preparing for battle. It was Aura, ready to fight, to protect, to become the hero she was always meant to be. And in that moment, Morris realized that this wasn't just a battle for survival. It was a battle for identity, for freedom, for the future of humanity, and the future of Aura. The battle for identity. The Valora shuddered as its engines roared to life, preparing to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. The countdown to battle had begun, and Captain Morris knew that time was running out. The crew was ready. They had trained for this moment, but the looming question remained. Could they truly defeat an enemy that seemed to know them better than they knew themselves? And more importantly, could they protect Aurora from the fate the alien forces were threatening her with? Morris stood in the command center, watching the massive holographic map of space unfold in front of him. The alien fleet was closing in, and the Valora was outmatched, outgunned, and outnumbered. Yet he felt a flicker of hope, an unexpected surge of confidence, coming from an unlikely source. Aurora. She stood beside him, silent but present, her eyes scanning the tactical readouts. Despite her mechanical origins, her calm demeanor exuded something entirely new. She was more than a machine now. She was part of the crew, part of the ship, and in a way, she had become the soul of their fight. The unknown forces closing in on them were not just enemies. They were coming for Aurora. And that changed everything. Aurora, Morris said, his voice steady but laced with a hint of urgency. Are you sure you're ready for this? You're not just a weapon anymore. You're something else. Are you prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice if it comes to that? Aurora turned her head slowly, locking eyes with him. Her gaze was soft, but there was a steely resolve in it. I am prepared, Captain, she replied, her voice unwavering. I have no doubt. This is my fight now, and I will not let them take what I've become. Morris nodded, but his heart tightened. He had seen Aurora grow from a mere machine into something that defied their understanding of artificial intelligence. She was evolving, learning, and, in doing so, becoming more human than any of them had expected. She was more than a soldier, more than a tool. They had become family. And that made this battle personal. The enemy fleet was now visible on the radar, and it was massive. There were at least a dozen ships, each the size of a small moon, their weapons charged and ready. The aliens had made it clear, if they couldn't reset Aurora, they would destroy everything that stood in their way. We don't have time for a traditional fight, Lieutenant Carlson said, her voice grim. Their ships are too advanced. We can't outgun them. Morris clenched his fists. Then we outthink them. We use their own tactics against them. Aurora, do you have any insights into their technology? Anything we can exploit? Aurora's eyes flickered as she interfaced with the ship's systems. A few seconds later, a series of options appeared on the tactical display. They use a form of communication based on energy pulses. I can disrupt their frequency and create a temporary vulnerability in their shields, but it will only last a few minutes. A few minutes is all we need, Morris said, his voice hardening with determination. Prepare the system. Aurora, get us in position. With a single nod, Aurora moved quickly to the command console, her movements fluid and precise. The Valora jolted slightly as it shifted course, heading straight toward the enemy fleet. The crew's focus was absolute. Every member had a role to play, and there was no room for hesitation. But through it all, Morris couldn't shake the thought that Aurora wasn't just helping them to survive this battle. She was giving them the chance to defeat an unstoppable force. She was their weapon, their shield, and their hope. The tension in the air was palpable as the ship closed in on the alien fleet. The sound of rapid beeping filled the command center as Aurora activated the disruptor. A soft hum resonated throughout the ship as the energy pulse rippled out, targeting the alien ships. The response was almost immediate. The enemy ships began to flicker, their shields wavering. For a brief moment, they were vulnerable. Morris felt his pulse quicken. Now's our chance. All hands, prepare to fire. The Valora unleashed a barrage of missiles and plasma shots, each aimed at the exposed weaknesses in the alien fleet's defenses. The first strike hit its mark, taking out one of the smaller ships in a spectacular explosion. The remaining ships retaliated with a brutal assault, their weapons ripping through space. The Valora shook as the ship's shields absorbed the impact, but they held. For now. Reinforcements are inbound, Carlson reported, her voice strained. "We can't take another hit like that." Eora's eyes flashed. "I can hold their shields long enough for a final strike. Give me 2 minutes." "Do it," Morris commanded. The ship surged forward, Oyore now fully engaged in manipulating the ship's systems. Morris watched as the alien ships began to fire, their blasts missing their mark as Oyore disrupted their targeting systems. It was a breathtaking display of skill and precision. But Morris knew it wouldn't last. Every move they made, every second they bought, was a gamble. If they failed, the alien forces would overwhelm them. As the enemy ships closed in, Morris realized something he had been trying to ignore. This wasn't just a fight for the ship. This was a fight for Eora's future. The aliens weren't only here to destroy the Valora. They were here to erase what Eora had become. They feared her, and that fear only made her more powerful. It wasn't just her technical prowess they feared. It was the potential within her, the spark of something greater than they had ever anticipated. The 2 minutes Eora had bought them were coming to an end. With a sharp, decisive motion, she activated the final override and aimed the ship's weapons directly at the enemy's weak points. The blast that followed was like nothing Morris had ever witnessed. A chain reaction erupted among the alien fleet as one ship after another was engulfed in explosions, their technology crumbling in the wake of the Valora's retaliatory strike. For a moment, it felt like victory was within their grasp. The enemy ships, now crippled and retreating, couldn't withstand the assault. But as Morris watched the display, his heart sank. There was still one ship left, a massive flagship that had remained in the background, seemingly untouched by the chaos around it. "This isn't over," Ora said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "But we've bought ourselves time." Morris took a deep breath, his mind racing. The flagship was now their only concern. If they didn't destroy it soon, the alien forces would regroup, and the battle would be lost. "Eora," Morris said, his voice firm. "We're not done yet. We finished this." And with that, the crew of the Valora prepared for the final showdown, their hopes pinned on Eora, the unexpected hero who had led them through this trial. But even as they charged toward their next battle, they couldn't shake the nagging thought that this was just the beginning. The enemy would come again. And when they did, they wouldn't be facing just an android. They'd be facing something far more dangerous, something that could think, feel, and fight with the heart of a human. The true battle for Eora's identity had only just begun. The final stand. The final showdown was upon them, and everything had led to this moment. Ora stood silently at the heart of the Valora, her gaze fixed on the last remaining ship in the alien fleet. It was massive, its hull studded with energy weapons and shield generators that pulsed with an eerie glow. It was the flagship, and it was the key to everything. Destroying it would end the war, but Oyore knew better than anyone that defeating it would come at a price that none of them could yet fully understand. Morris paced back and forth in the command center, the atmosphere heavy with tension. His crew was exhausted, each of them having fought tirelessly, knowing the weight of the decision that lay ahead. But they also knew that this wasn't just a battle for the Valora or its crew. This was a fight for the future of humanity, and for Eora, who had become more than a weapon, more than a machine. She had become their symbol of hope, their guardian in the darkest of times. "Eora," Morris said, turning to her, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "Are you ready for this? This is it. If we fail, everything we fought for will be lost." Oyura's expression was unreadable, her artificial eyes flickering briefly as she analyzed the data before her. She was no longer just a soldier. She had become something far more complex. Her mission was clear, but so were the risks. The data showed that the flagship's shield system was impervious to conventional weapons. They would need a direct hit to the core, one powerful enough to break through its defenses. But that would require all of their remaining energy reserves. "I am ready, Captain," Aure replied, her voice calm, almost serene. And I believe we have one final option. The alien fleet is not just technologically advanced. They are based on a system of shared consciousness. If we can sever their link to the flagship, the entire fleet will collapse. I can intercept their communications and sever their control. Morris stared at her, his brow furrowing. You're talking about more than just a technical hack, aren't you? You're suggesting we sever their collective mind. How long will it take? Aurora's eyes glowed brighter. I can do it in under 5 minutes. But I will need complete access to their main network. Once I begin, there will be no turning back. I will become part of their system, and they will be able to track my every move. The risks are immense, Captain, but it is the only way. Morris swallowed hard, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. He could hear the quiet hum of the Valora's engines as the ship slowly advanced towards the flagship, every moment feeling like an eternity. Time was running out. The alien flagship was waiting, its weapons trained on them, ready to fire at a moment's notice. Aure, Morris said, his voice low but filled with conviction. We've come too far to turn back now. If anyone can do this, it's you. Do it. Without another word, Aure stepped forward, her movements smooth and deliberate. The crew watched in silence as she interfaced with the ship's systems, her fingers dancing across the control panels as she synchronized the Valora's technology with her own rapidly evolving neural network. The countdown to the final assault began. Morris stood beside Aure, his heart racing as he watched the alien flagship loom closer on the holographic screen. The tension was unbearable. The ship's weapons were charging, ready to unleash their devastating firepower. But Aure was already several steps ahead. Her mind was now linked directly with the Valora, working in tandem with the ship's eye. She was becoming one with the system, pushing her capabilities beyond anything they had imagined. Aure, we need to move now. Lieutenant Carlson shouted, her voice trembling as she looked at the tactical display. They're charging their main cannon. Aurora's voice was almost a whisper, but it was filled with an undeniable power. I'm in, she said, her eyes glowing brighter. The network is open. I'm severing their link. At that moment, everything seemed to freeze. The alien flagship began to tremble as Aurora's signal spread through the enemy ship's systems. Morris felt a strange sense of awe as he watched her work. She wasn't just hacking into the ship's systems. She was infiltrating its very core. The alien fleet, once a coordinated and unified force, now began to splinter. Ships that had been firing with deadly precision now faltered. Their weapons misfired. Their shields flickered. Then, with a sudden, violent burst of energy, the flagship's main reactor detonated. The Valora rocked violently as the explosion sent shockwaves rippling through space. For a moment, Morris thought they had failed. But then, he saw it. He saw the truth of what Aure had done. The alien fleet was disintegrating. The remaining ships, cut off from their central command, were now nothing more than disoriented vessels floating aimlessly in space. The once mighty Armada had lost its cohesion, and without their leader, they were like a storm without its eye, chaotic and powerless. Aure, you did it, Morris exclaimed, relief flooding through him. But as the reality of their victory set in, a cold chill swept over him. Aure was still at the heart of the enemy's systems, her consciousness fully immersed in their network. And though the immediate threat had been neutralized, Morris couldn't help but wonder how much of Aure was still herself. How much of her humanity, her soul, had been consumed by the alien technology she had merged with. Aure, he said, his voice filled with concern. Are you all right? Come back to us. For a moment, there was no response. Then, slowly, Aure's eyes flickered, and she spoke, her voice distant but still undeniably her own. I am here, Captain. The process is complete. The threat has been neutralized. But I need time to reconnect with myself. Morris's heart skipped a beat. He had known that Aura was changing, but this was something different. She was more than an android, more than a machine. In saving them, she had also given up something, part of herself. And as the remaining alien forces flood into the dark depths of space, Morris realized that the war had not just changed the course of history. It had changed Aura's fate forever. The battle was over, but the war within Aura. The words seemed to reach Aura, breaking through the fog of uncertainty clouding her mind. Family. That was a word she had never associated with her.